Designing a new prosperity. What is wrong with what we've got, and what could work better? That's your starter.
What is wrong with what we've got? That's interesting. I've been here most of the day listening, and everybody's well-meaning. So let's just take that off. Everybody's well-meaning and really wants great things. But most of what I hear are tweaks on neoliberalism. In other words, we'll have this sort of growth-based company, but we'll do more good with some of our profits. Or we'll still make sugar water for children, but we'll put it in recyclable bottles. That will somehow just mitigate some of the damage that we're causing with our business or with our business processes. And that's just not good enough, is really what I'm here to say. It's actually not good enough. It's like changing the software in the computer when it's the operating system that's the problem. And I feel like the rules of the operating system have become so embedded in the way we think about money, about business, about success, even about things like prosperity, that we end up making extremely foolish choices without even realizing that we're making choices. Yeah. Thank you. And I realized this was the moment I saw this clearly was when I saw a guy who used to be a friend of mine, not that he's an enemy, but one of the founders of Twitter, Evan Williams, was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal the morning that Twitter went public, and he had the number $4.3 billion under his face, which was the amount of money he made that morning when the company had its IPO. And I thought, half of me thought, yay, my friend is a billionaire. And the other half of me thought, this guy is fucked. And the reason I understood that he was fucked and his company was fucked is because if they give you $4.3 billion, it's because they expect to make 100 times that back. At least a 10x, but they want a 100x return on that. And so now Twitter, which I think is a great little app, except for its presidential influence. It's a great app. It makes $2 billion a year off a 140-character messaging app, which should be great, but it's considered an abject failure by Wall Street because it's no longer growing. It turns out $2 billion is about all you can make off a 140-character messaging app. But we live in a world where that is not okay. You can't stop at $2 billion a year. You got to somehow grow. And it's just accepted. Evan never questioned the idea. You have a great idea for an app, what do? You go to the venture capitalists, you get the first few $1 million, and then you sell it to another round of investors. You do Series A, Series B, IPO. As if that was a given condition of nature. This is what you do. This is how it works. And it's not. But there's a growth mandate that is embedded in our currency. It's embedded in our corporatism, but it is not embedded in nature. Things grow and you can get to full size. Look, we don't hit the ceiling. We stop after a while and we become sustainable at this size. A coral reef becomes sustainable at a certain size. It doesn't have to take over the entire planet to be healthy. What fools would measure one's health by how much they can get to weigh? Oh, I'm 300 to 400. Oh my God, you're healthier than me. Right? So where did this come from? And that's, as a media theorist, I have to figure that out. That's my job. Where did these assumptions, how did they get embedded? So it turns out I had to go all the way back to medieval Europe. And there was this moment when the economy did not work as a growth-based economy. It was right after the soldiers came back from the Crusades. They had opened all these trade routes to Arab nations and throughout Europe. And that's when they erected the marketplace, the marketplace that as we know it. It was an innovation they borrowed. It was called the bazaar, where they went. And they brought it back. It was the marketplace. And they wanted to create ways for people to exchange goods without barter, without you needing a chicken in order for me to get my shoes. So they invented market monies. And these were monies that were usually, issued in the morning and they would expire by night, or they were based in bread receipts or shoe receipts. These were monies that were optimized really just to prime the market, to promote trading at the beginning of the day, and then they would settle accounts at the end of the day. And people got really wealthy or prosperous in this peer-to-peer economy. I mean, not necessarily by having lots of savings, but they worked very little. They worked 3 or 4 days a week. Women were taller in medieval Europe at any time in England until around the 1970s, when women didn't catch up in their height. Now, no, I'm not saying that medieval times were a great time to live. People threw rocks at you and did all sorts of, they burned you and things. I mean, there was nasty stuff that happened, but economically, there was something happening, and it wasn't growth, it was circulation. And all of this economic circulation led to more prosperous people. The problem, of course, was that the aristocracy got relatively poorer as the peasants became the middle class. So what did they do? They came up with 2 economic innovations to prevent this circulatory economy from sustaining itself. One was the chartered monopoly, or what we now call the corporation. Chartered monopoly, all it really said was you're not allowed to do business in a certain industry unless you are the monopoly chartered by the king. So if you were a shoemaker creating shoes, making shoes, and then exchanging that value with someone else for what they did, now you had to go work for His Majesty's Royal Shoe Company. And now instead of creating and exchanging value, you were selling your time. You were selling your time to an employer. That's when employment really was born. This whole idea of having a job is an artifact of that moment in history. That's when they put the clock up on the tower in the middle of town to make it look like there was technologically fair, right? Oh, this is a real hour. Look, you worked that 1 hour as if this is just. When the only time people had ever bought and sold human time was in slavery. And now we were doing it in an aspirational way. And the second thing they came up with was a way to make all of those local market monies illegal, which they did. They said, no, now you have to use coin of the realm. You have to use centrally issued currency. Centrally issued currency was a little strange because really what it was a way for wealthy people to lend money to poorer people so they would have a means of exchange, but they would have to pay back with interest. So now, in order for me to buy and sell shoes or chickens or anything with her, we've got to borrow money from a central treasury and pay it back at interest. If you're paying back money at interest, as we all know, it means the economy has to grow. Because where does that other money come from? Now, the growth was fine as long as we were invading colonial territories, as long as we were, enslaving brown people and taking their resources. But we ended up with an economic system that destroys and extracts. Corporatism is extractive, and central currency is growth-based. If those are the two, really the only forces, the only institutions that are allowed to survive by law in our economy, what kind of economy are we going to have? One that's extractive and based on growth. And if you live like that for 400 or 500 years, you're going to think that's just the way the economy works. And so the most successful companies in an economy like that are these Walmart-like companies, which act pretty much like British East India Trading Company. You go to a region, you undersell every local merchant, you become the only possible employer, then you pay everybody welfare-dependent wages, suck all the value out of the place, and then move on to the next. Now, the problem with this, as Deloitte, a real finance company or finance institution, figured out, was that for the past 75 years, as a result of this extractive, growth-based mentality, corporate profit over corporate size has been going down. So even in this age, in this internet age, corporate profit over corporate size has been going down. What does that mean? It means corporations are really good at sucking all the money out of a system, all the value out of a system, but they're really bad at deploying it once they have it. It's a kind of financial obesity where they store what had been circulating value, they store it in fat, but can't do anything with it. And this is a problem for them. They understand this is a problem for them, that they're growing. So growth is actually their problem, not their goal. Growth is bad for them, not just for us. But what do? They get the disruptive digital technologies, and what do? They do the same model, but on steroids. So Uber is basically Walmart on digital steroids. So instead of it taking 20 years to bankrupt a marketplace, it takes 2 years. The digital economy is not revolutionary in that sense. You have to understand the digital economy as reactionary. It's conservative. It's attempting to conserve Renaissance-era economic innovations. Laws that were written by people who have long since left the building and who are writing it for priorities that we don't even remember. But now, instead of doing it through law, we do it through code. So we don't even need to have government and corporations in cahoots. So what do we do instead? What I think we should do instead is use our digital technologies, such as we have, or use our business plans to optimize not for growth of capital, but for the velocity of money and the generation of value. But the velocity of money is the opposite of the extraction of value, and the generation of value is the opposite of growth. How do we do that? Well, there's a ton of ways to do that. Local currencies. If you have people with needs and people with skills, you don't need a bank to come lend money to a factory or lend money to a corporation to build a factory to give people jobs. You don't need jobs. All you need is the exchange of goods and services between people. In America, we are tearing down houses as we speak because there's houses in foreclosure. We're tearing them down because if we don't, then market prices will go down. We can't just let people live in those houses. Why? Because they don't have jobs. So now we have to invent stupid pieces of plastic, stupid products that people don't need so that those people can go make them for us. We have to dispose of more things. We've got to dispose of razor blades, dispose of bottles, dispose of stuff so that we can give those people jobs. If you and I share a lawnmower, if everyone on the block shares a lawnmower, that's bad for the economy. This is a problem. It's only bad for the economy if we have an economy that has to grow. We only need an economy that has to grow if our economy exists to pay back bankers who haven't worked in 2 millennia. The other way to think about it, and this is so hard for businesses, is make other people rich. If a business makes its customers rich, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. Why? Because now you've got wealthy customers. If a business makes its partners rich, its suppliers rich, if it's making everyone else rich, then what is it doing? It's creating a more fertile soil for its own business activity. If a business goes in with a mindset of extraction, wanting to, oh no, they're still making money. My customer can still survive at this price, so I'm going to raise it. My employee can still survive at this level of wages, so I'm going to lower it. That all makes sense in a short-term, growth-based, extractive economic business model. It doesn't make sense if you think of your business like a family business, as something that you want to be around when your children are around, as something that you don't want your kids to be ashamed of later. It's that short-termism that has, actually the CEOs get this. And I've been with CEOs who have wept with me privately in their offices because they understand that they are cannibalizing their own companies in order to show growth to shareholders at the expense of the company. So that, well, I'm going to have to leave in 18 months because they understand that's when the jig is up. The other thing is to think about, what does it mean to live in a lending economy? I mean, I don't know if any of you are bankers, but the role of banks in a circulatory economy would not just be to exploit their monopoly on capital, but to think, how can I facilitate lending within this community? If a pizzeria wants $100,000 to expand the restaurant, don't give them a $100,000 loan they have to pay back. Give them $50,000 contingent on their ability to raise $50,000 from the community. And how could they do that? Well, there's a lot of ways we can talk. The object of the game here is, well, it's complicated. But the object of the game is to understand that, at least so far, technology has not been disruptive to the economy. Technology has been steroidal. Technology has simply amplified the economy that we're already in. Right? We have the opportunity instead of living in this reactionary way. The idea would be not to use technology to continue optimizing human beings for the market as we know it, but to use technology to optimize the market for human beings as we want to live. Okay, thanks a lot.